welcome everyone again. Let's start. We have this webinar. This is this week's webinar as a follow-up, let's say, from the last week's webinar that was the 3rd of July, where we took a critical look at NATO across two panels, discussing US foreign policy under Trump, its impact on NATO, US-Europe relations, as well as European militarization, and the portrayal of China and Russia as a strategic rivals. And now we are after the summit that took place in Ankara, the 7th and 8th of July. In this webinar, we will have again two panels. The first panel, that's a shorter panel, that's with two speakers, or will be two speakers. I will explain that later, to examine what the NATO summit, what has been discussed and what it means for our vision and our movement also, and how do we build alternatives to NATO and war in this new context, let's say, since a few years of drastic militarization in which NATO is a driving force. And so maybe to start with, according to NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, this NATO summit was a success. And as you know, Trump even hailed it as a love story, although prior to the NATO summit, he criticized again his European allies for lack of cooperation on Iran, on Cyprus, on Greenland, and he lashed also out against Spain. So what is striking in that case, and I think Joseph, our first speaker, will address that more or better, is that this NATO statement is extremely short, as it was the case also in the former statement of the NATO summit held in Den Haag. And I think this is an important sign that the self-image of this, as Mark Rutte says, this summit was a success. We presented ourselves as unified, was more, like say, to cover up the disunity inside NATO. So NATO in crisis, and Trump, of course, is an important element in that. And also, what is also remarkable is that usually there is always already an announcement of the next summit, and this hasn't been done. So I think this is because they are afraid of showing that disunity. Okay, so I think, Joseph, we have two speakers. The first speaker is Joseph Gerson, and the second will be Walden Bello for the first part. That will take more or less 45 minutes, 50 minutes, before we switch to the second part that will be moderated by Annachiara. Walden is still struggling with traffic in Bangkok, and I hope he will join us as soon as he is online. But let us start with Joseph Gerson, who is co-president of the International Peace Bureau, president of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security in the United States, and who was also founding member of the NATO War Network, and is in the National Coordination Committee. He works closely with Asian and European peace and nuclear disarmament movements, was co-chair of the working group that produced Common Security in the Pacific Region report, and is a frequent keynote speaker at the World Conference against the atomic and bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and other international and US forums. So he published several books on that and articles in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, The Nation, Peace Review, Common Dreams, and many other publications. So, Joseph, I give the floor to you to talk about what has been discussed at Ankara, or the main takeaways maybe from the Ankara summit, and then what this means for our vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ludo, and greetings to my fellow panelists here and to others. I'm going to dive in. Despite its well-advertised tensions and tectonic geopolitical changes, this week's NATO summit demonstrated that NATO remains somewhat resilient. It remains committed to serving and reinforcing U.S. hegemony across Europe and globally. Not a lot has changed since former U.S. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote that U.S. global dominance relies on controlling the periphery of Eurasia, NATO in the West, Southwest Asia in the South, and its Asia-Pacific allies from South Korea and Japan through the Philippines and down to Australia. In the 21st century, military planning, as well as trade, is deeply integrated across these three regions. The summit served to reinforce what is emerging as a new bloc system for the new and yet to be named era. Threatened by the US and NATO, as John Mearsheimer has remarked, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea each see the US as a mortal enemy. While each of these nations' situations and ambitions are quite different, they share an interest in fending off threats from the US and are thus increasingly binding themselves to one another, economically, militarily, and diplomatically. There were four major dimensions to the summit. First, NATO's survival, despite its fault lines. Second, the first day's focus on expanding an integrated European and U.S. military production infrastructures and weapons sales contracts. $50 billion in contracts were signed, with commitments made to Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Palantir, Anadolu, Germany's Rheinmetall, French Airbus, Sweden's Saab, and Turkey's Asinal. And even Denmark will be buying U.S. Hellfire missiles and ships for patrolling the Arctic. Third, the final declaration celebrated and committed to still more European military spending, and support for Ukraine was manifest. The move to what is termed NATO 3.0, with European nations assuming greater responsibilities for the European theater, reflects the United States' relative decline, something which has been glaringly demonstrated in its failed war against Iran. Trump and his coterie understand that U.S. quote-unquote leadership is only possible with NATO. Despite his rhetoric, Trump and company value NATO because it allows them to do what they want to do elsewhere, especially in the most economically dynamic part of the world, the Indo-Pacific. The transatlantic and increasingly global alliance remains strong despite its fault lines due to overlapping U.S. and European elites' shared interests, if not values. Rutte and his allies insulated the alliance from Trump, his madness, his dementia, his claim that U.S. ships had been attacked by the Islamic Republic of Japan, demands for Greenland, and his complaints that European nations didn't deliver all that he wanted in his war on Iran. Toward that end, the summit was convened and adjourned in less than a day, and the final declaration, as Ludo was just saying, was limited to only 6 paragraphs, leaving little room for debate. And in fact, although not widely reported here in the United States anyway, European allies have allowed U.S. warplanes and ships to operate from Europe and provide access to their facilities for repairs and refueling. So NATO has been involved in the war with Iran. As we could read in Carnegie Europe, quote, transatlanticism was never only a values project. It was and remains a convergence of security, economic, and technological interests between two regions that together account for roughly 43% of global GDP and comprise the world's most capable alliance. The best way to understand what went down in Ankara may be to use the lens of transactional deal-making among mafia families. Trump and Colby got what they wanted when European elites signed on to NATO 3.0 with increased European military spending and preparations to contain and press Russia, so that the U.S. can focus on containing China's ambitions and reinforcing its 21st century Indo-Pacific hegemony. Remember, this is a U.S. goal begun way back when with Obama's pivot to Asia, so it's a long haul here. With NATO 3.0, the U.S. will gradually reduce its ostensible roles in guaranteeing European security. Worth noting is that European NATO members already massively outspend Russia for their militaries, and they have conventional military superiority over Russia. With NATO 3.0, these differentials will only become greater. In time, the U.S. will provide only what European allies cannot: nuclear threats and high-tech intelligence. Note that Trump said nothing about pulling more troops out of Europe. The announced 5,000 troop reduction in Germany has yet to begin. and commitment for increased U.S. troop rotations in Poland was announced. The Hegseth-Colby campaign for major U.S. reductions in Europe has been slowed by a 2-month review imposed or won by Rubio. In the end, Trump and no one else is the decision maker. And remember, despite Trump's ranting about NATO's limited support for his war against Iran, the U.S. would be very limited in its Southwest Asian and North African power projection without its bases in Europe. The West was not shattered. In an exchange, the U.S. signed on to the dominant European narrative about Russia and joined the summit's final declaration with its commitments to support Ukraine in the war with Russia. This includes blessing Ukrainian attacks on Russian energy infrastructure deep within Russia. The declaration identified Russia as a long-term threat and reiterated the treaty's Article 5 commitment to come to the aid of any NATO member that is attacked. I'm just remembering here that Gore Vidal once, in one of his books, described the ability of someone to start a war. On the border, they release a bunch of horses to go into the neighboring country's territory. They claimed it was stolen and the war is on. So Ukraine won't be joining NATO anytime soon, but its advanced military technologies and warfighting experience make it increasingly a powerful adjunct to NATO. NATO 3.0 makes it possible for the U.S. to reinforce its lattice-like military alliance system and its military buildup across the Indo-Pacific. Note that RIMPAC, the Rim of the Pacific, naval show of force, is being held at the same time as the NATO summit. As Wright has written, it includes 10 of 30 NATO nations' forces, almost 1/3 of all NATO countries, and sent their military forces, land, air, and sea to Hawaii to participate in these 38-day war drills. Powerful show of force. The summit also demonstrated Turkey's increasing role in NATO, both in relationship to Southwest Asia, but also its increased weapons production capacity for the alliance. Trump tossed Erdogan what may prove to be only a symbolic military bone with his offer to endorse the sale of F-35 jet fighters. They're also nuclear capable to Turkey. But there remain obstacles to those sales. Turkey's Russians S-400 air defense systems bought from Russia, and the need for congressional authorization to those sales pose serious obstacles. On the subject of weapons sales, in his ostensible tilt toward Ukraine, Trump authorized the licensing for Ukraine to produce Patriot missile defense systems. This is too little too late to be meaningful. It will take at least a year to get such complex weapons manufacturing systems up and running, and Putin would certainly make targeting such construction facilities a primary target. More to defend this construction, already beleaguered Ukraine would need to divert its very limited missile and drone defenses to protecting the construction, leaving the country still more vulnerable. Reinforcing the global commitments to NATO in Ankara, the Japanese government called for deeper cooperation between NATO and its Indo-Pacific partners, Australia, Japan, and South Korea, and New Zealand, at a meeting on the alliance sidelines. Japan, which hosts more than 100 military bases, U.S. military bases and installations, and which has its most militarist government since 1945, already has a security and defense pact with the European Union. In recent months, Tokyo has created and deepened strategic partnerships and weapons development agreements with countries including Britain, Germany, Italy, and Sweden. So it's a deeply integrated system. Tokyo is also in the process of doubling its military spending. It's moving to trash Article 9, the heart of its peace constitution. It has deployed conventional preemptive strike missiles that can reach China and North Korea, and it has declared its readiness to go to war for Taiwan. Despite the still open wounds of Japanese conquest and colonization of Korea in the last century, the U.S.-backed Japanese ROK alliance is stronger than it ever has been. And there is increasing discussion in South Korea, as Francis will talk about, I'm sure, about returning U.S. nuclear weapons to the peninsula or developing its own nuclear arsenal. The U.S. is deepening its military ties with the Philippines, which Walden will certainly describe better than me. And then there are AUKUS and the Quad, which tie in Australia and India into this network. Several other points are worth noting. Europe's massive military spending increases, trending at about 20%, have been financed to this point largely by debt. That can't continue. The Stop Rearm Europe warns, if this increased spending continues, it can only come at the expense of essential social services. Those cuts and the suffering they cause will further open the way for far right-wing gains. In truth, we're still a long way from an operational NATO 3.0. As the French and German refusal to cooperate on developing the next jet fighter indicates, divisions among the leading European powers remain very real. Issues of command and control and many others will be challenging to address. And while not largely reported in the media, the US and European national security mandarins have been remarking about the failure to announce the NATO, as Ludo said, failure to announce NATO's summit in 2027, if it happens at all. This may serve to prevent a new round of headlines and reports about US NATO divisions, and it will also allow for more backroom deals. My writ has been to talk about the NATO summit, not the Ukraine war nor common security alternatives once that war is concluded. That said, it should be obvious that the only way to end the war is with a dirty deal that includes a ceasefire in place, security guarantees for both Ukraine and Russia, and a commitment to negotiate the status of currently occupied territories over time. And I have been encouraged in Track 2 discussions with European, Russian, and US figures to hear references to building on the traditions and surviving resources of the OSCE to build a post-war common security European strategic architecture. I hope that was somewhat helpful, and I look forward to hearing my friends and partners' talks as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for this very interesting, let's say, giving us the insight in what has been discussed. I think it's very important to address again this enormous militarization, and let's say that the big winner of that last summit, as it was also already the case for the previous summit, is the arms industry or the war industry that again make a lot of billions of money out of disarmament policies, and again, as you said, at the expense of import all public resources needed for social and environmental protection, let's say. So before I give Walden Bello the floor, I forgot that there is also, of course, we had in Turkey, in Istanbul, a counter summit by all political and organizations and peace organizations in Istanbul. There was also a demonstration. And so I would ask Melton Kolgazi or Beyza Sishmezi, I'm not sure if I pronounce it well, to give us briefly what has been done, what has been discussed, and what happened also, because Turkey or the regime, the Erdogan regime, there were like arrests, like 200 people that have been arrested. What is happening to them, and what is your conclusion of all this?
Thanks, Ludo. Thanks. I can start quickly. I will try to keep it short. So hello, and thanks to this network to bring us together today. But before starting, I would just like to say a special welcome to the comrades and friends who tried to reach us in Istanbul, but were turned away, some of whom are on this call right now. I can see that. So they weren't allowed to stand with us in Istanbul, but we are standing together today here, and no state can prevent that. I'm speaking on behalf of the NATO No to NATO initiative. It's an international anti-militarist coalition founded the Invitation of the Workers' Party of Turkey, TIP. For those who may not know our domestic context deeply, TIP represents a growing socialist movement in our country, in Turkey. Just quickly, let me say a few words about it because it matters for understanding where we speak from. TIP holds 4 seats in the parliament in Turkey, and one of those 4 members of parliament is Can Atalay, and he is in prison today, for example. So the Constitutional Court of Turkey has ruled not once, not twice, but 3 times that his imprisonment and his removal from parliament violate the constitution. Those rulings have still not been implemented, however. So he remains behind the bars. So this is a concrete example of what the state of Turkey, what Erdogan's regime does to its own elected opposition. So our road to July began in early this year. On April 4, we held the Global Anti-Militarist webinar. Some of you also are aware of that. So we try to bring voices together from many struggles against war. From that day on, we spent months building a coalition with comrades from various countries. So out of that work came the International Anti-Imperialist Peace Summit held on last week in Kadıköy, Istanbul. So it was aimed to it was aimed as a direct counter mobilization to the NATO summit held in Ankara in last days, where the leaders of the war machine gathered to approve new weapons, new budgets, and new wars. The summit was substantive. I will just quickly mention what we did that day. We had 3 panels, changing new trends of imperialism, militarism, and the role of NATO. Another one was imperialist aggregation in West Asia, not NATO's role in Iran, Palestine, and Turkey. And the last one was ways to strengthen the peace movement against NATO and imperialism. And after the panels, there came a forum of an hour and a half, open to everyone in the hall. It was titled "The Agenda of the Peace Movement Against NATO: International Struggle, Paths and Possibilities." So the next day, on last Sunday, we marched. The international delegation joined the demonstration in Kadıköy under a shared banner. And the work continues now together with delegates and beyond them, hopefully, we are drafting a common declaration of our movement. So I just also want to tell you very quickly that, as I mentioned, some international comrades who traveled to join our summit never reached us. They were detained the moment they arrived at the airport. Their passports were confiscated, their phones were confiscated. They were held overnight and they were deported before they ever set foot in our summit hall. Let me name them very quickly because we value that. So comrades from Sol Berlin, comrades from SDS and Linksjugendsulet München, both youth organizations of Die Linke, comrades Sean from International Peace Bureau, and Alessio from Fronte Popolare in Italy, Sippo from the Working Class Anti-Militarists of Finland. So they are activists and political representatives who came for a public and legal political meeting, yet they were treated like criminals for just opposing the war. And yeah, and that was not the end of it. Maybe there will be another session for that, but in Ankara itself, comrades who peacefully demonstrated against NATO summit were detained. So the state answered peaceful demonstrations with police brutality. So just another important point is that it's raising an open question actually. Yeah, Gabriel as well. from DM-25. He was some of like him, other comrades also was stopped at the airport, and they were interrogated maybe for hours, for example. Yes, it's not just for the detentions actually, but there is one open question. It's yes, how did the authorities in Turkey know exactly who to stop at the border? Did German authorities, for example, share information? And did Italian authorities do the same? Yeah, authorities in Turkey themselves have pointed at tip from German authorities as the reason for at least one of these stops. We know that, but German authorities have denied it. So that contradiction is exactly why this question still needs an answer. So, but none of this surprised us. By the way, we know the history since Turkey joined NATO. This alliance has run stay-behind networks and counter-guerrilla structures inside our country. And it's when NATO last came in Istanbul in 2004. The Harbiye Taksim area was ringed with barriers and snipers. But here is the truth. They cannot change. Despite these deportations, the summit happened. Despite these detentions, the panels happened. And here today, this is happening. What Erdogan's regime did to our deported and detained comrades has a name. It's repression. It's state repression. They tell the world that NATO defends democracy, and then they keep an elected member of parliament in prison, for example. They deport peace activists at the airport and arrest people in the streets. So before I finish, I just want to thank you. This network stand with us before the summit, during the summit, and even today. And we believe that what we built in Istanbul doesn't end in Istanbul. The declaration, maybe Meltem will mention it, we are drafting together is just the beginning. It's not a conclusion. And we are already thinking about the next steps, about carrying this work forward together, perhaps toward a future regional gathering in the Balkans, for example, where our movements can meet again face to face. And we believe that borders did not stop this solidarity. Deportations didn't stop it. Detentions didn't stop it. So nothing they have will stop it. We will keep building this together until we live in a world without NATO, without imperialism, and without war. So this world is ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Beza. Thank you very much. And I have to say, I had the privilege to be a witness of the wonderful work you did in Istanbul. And I think I speak in the name of all of us that we express our solidarity with those who have been arrested. And I don't know what will happen for some of them, but I think it's very courageous what you did in Turkey under these circumstances. And at least it proves that the self-image of NATO as an alliance of democratic nations, as you said, that it's a deep fake. Meltem, you would like to add something about the declaration, for example?
Yes.
Briefly, because we are...
Yes,
the
I'd
time
like
is running.
to add very, very little things that after NATO summit in Ankara, we saw that the Turkey and also USA have some new plans on the Eurasia Balkan side, for example. And some planes, I think 19s, then will be sent to Estonia. And Turkey tried to some new agreements with the Romania with the effects of the USA. And Erdogan mentioned that the Turkey is the middle of the Ukraine and Russia, and a lot of things that are talked about the S-400 and other weapons in Turkey, and other new weapons. And so in also our there is declaration. Also, we discussed about that the new important area for the NATO's new plans, the Balkans are very important for us, and I think that we can say that the anti-NATO movement must be strength in the Balkans, I think. And in our declaration, we mentioned that as the next step, we get together in the new plans and the new attacks on Balkans, and we should get together against the new agreements, new weapons in the Balkan area, and also we will continue to be in solidarity in the West Asian side. But the next, I think the next step for us, we are looking for a new solidarity chances and gathering together against the new NATO's Balkans attacks or new agreements. For example, it's very important what is the relation new weapons with Estonia, Romania, and I think Trump and USA give some missions to the Erdogan about that, and then we will together talk about that more. I think the next at the next step in our declaration, we mentioned that let's be in solidarity. The next attacks of NATO in the Balkans, and the next step for us may be gathering in Balkans or gathering together against the new attacks of the NATO in Balkans. I would like to mention that. Thank you, Beyza, explained everything for us.
Thank you, Milton. Thank you very much. So if I'm well informed, the declaration you talked about will be finalized tomorrow and probably then on your website, and then we can share it all. If you can always share the website address in the chat box, so everyone knows that they can find it there from tomorrow on, probably, or maybe later. Thank you. So now I would like to give the floor to Walden Bello, who is addressing us from Bangkok, if I'm well informed. Walden was recently conferred an honoris causa doctorate by the University of Helsinki for his lifetime achievements in political economy, sociology, and political activism, following similar honors from Pantheon University in Athens and Murdoch University in Australia. He obtained his PhD in sociology from the Princeton University and is retired professor at the University of the Philippines and currently an honorary senior research fellow at the State University of New York at Binghamton. He is author or co-author of many books, 27 books, the most recent of which is Backlash, the Global Rise of the Radical Right. Walden, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ludo, and thanks to Beyza and Menem, as well as to Joe Gerson, who gave us a very good introduction. I'm going to share my thoughts on Ukraine and NATO, a view from someone in the Global South. So the invasion of Ukraine by Russia in February 2022 was an act of international aggression that was rightfully condemned by the UN on March 2, 2022, with 147 of 193 member countries approving the resolution. However, most of the 147 countries that condemned Russia's aggression have since moved to a neutral position. As the New York Times put it, and I quote, "A year on, it is becoming clearer. While the West's core coalition remains remarkably solid, it never convinced the rest of the world to isolate Russia. Instead of cleaving in two, the world has fragmented. A vast middle sees Russia's invasion as primarily a European and American problem. Rather than view it as an existential threat, these countries are largely focused on protecting their own interests amid the global and geopolitical upheaval caused by the invasion, unquote. Now, why has most of the world, including most of the global south, refused to be drawn in deeper into the conflict? Now, in the Western press, the image evoked by Putin's invasion of Ukraine is that of Hitler marching in Czechoslovakia in 1938. Now, over the last few years, the world has realized that the Russia-Ukraine conflict had much more complex causes. There is, for one, the historical and cultural dimension. Ukraine and Russia were once part of the same state, and when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, they went their separate ways. However, being part of the Soviet Union for over 70 years and of the Russian Empire before the October 1917 revolution, there have been very close cultural, linguistic, and ethnic ties between Russians and Ukrainians, with significant number of Russian speakers in those parts of Ukraine that adjoin Russia. Russian is the most common first language in the Donbas and Crimea regions of Ukraine and the city of Kharkov, as well as being the predominant language in large cities in the eastern and southern portions of the country. According to one survey, Russia is used at home by 43 to 46% of the population of the country, a similar proportion to those that use Ukrainian at home. Now, looking at recent events, it is hard to sustain this one-sided image of unprovoked Russian aggression. Perhaps the key event that influenced Putin's controversial annexationist moves was the so-called Euromaidan uprising in 2014, which overthrew President Viktor Yanukovych, a Putin ally. It is undeniable that Ukrainian fascists played a prominent role in the Euromaidan events, and the Russian government said they were backed covertly by Western governments. Shortly after the Euromaidan events, Russia invaded and annexed Crimea in 2013-2014, with Putin saying that this move was justified by the dangers posed by the new Ukrainian regime to the ethnic majority Russian in Crimea. Thereafter, Russia supported separatist movements in the Donbas region in southeastern Ukraine, where there was large numbers of ethnic Russians and Russian speakers. Now, these events must be seen in the context of moves and counter-moves between the Russians and the Ukrainians. One can also say that Russia both intervened as well as was pulled in by the ethnic Russians in the Ukraine. The point is, this was a complex concatenation of events, not a unilateral, unilinear, one-sided process of Russian intervention. Now, a second major consideration for the global South's refusal to be pulled into the Ukraine conflict is that Russia regarded NATO expansion to its borders as an existential threat. A major concern of Putin and his predecessors was the eastward expansion of the European Union and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. When the Soviet bloc fell apart in 1991-92, there were assurances made to the Russians that NATO would not expand eastwards. As then U.S. Secretary of State James Baker told then Soviet leader Gorbachev in February 1990, and I quote, "There would be no extension of NATO's jurisdiction for forces of NATO 1 inch to the east," unquote. Now, the succeeding U.S. administration and its allies, however, disregarded concerns and warnings from Russia that its security would be imperiled by NATO's eastward expansion. Not only were new members from the old Warsaw Pact, the old military alliance of the Soviet bloc countries, admitted, but NATO announced at its summit in Bucharest in 2008 that Georgia and Ukraine would soon join the organization. Shortly after that announcement, Russia invaded Georgia, like Ukraine, a former part of the Soviet Union, underlining Russia's determination that former members of the Soviet Union should not be allowed into NATO. Now, these warnings went unheeded. As the Council of Foreign Relations, a forum close to the US government, describes it, and I quote, "Despite remaining a non-member, Ukraine grew its ties with NATO in the years leading up to the 2022 invasion. Ukraine held annual military exercises with the alliance, and in 2020 became one of just 6 enhanced security partners, a special status for the bloc's close non-member allies. Moreover, Kiev affirmed its goal to eventually gain full NATO membership. In the weeks leading up to its 2022 intervention, Russia made several major security demands of the US and NATO, including that they cease expanding the alliance, seek Russian consent for certain NATO deployments, and remove US nuclear weapons from Europe. Alliance leaders responded that they were open to new diplomacy, but were unwilling to discuss shutting NATO's doors to new members, unquote. A third major consideration for skepticism on the part of the Global South is that a great many people in Europe, in fact, see the Russian threat invoked by the European elites as exaggerated and serving mainly the interests of the Baltic states. Let me give you as an example the opinion of Wolfgang Streeck, probably Europe's leading sociologist, when I posed the question in an interview last year, and I quote, "Is Russia the enemy?" His answer, "I don't see that. The official rhetoric in Europe is that Russia is the enemy and that in 5 years' time, the Russians will be ready to march on Europe." Now, this is a picture that is above all spread by the Baltic states. The 3 Baltic countries are very small. They need someone else to fight their wars for them, and this can only be Germany. They had tried this alliance in the last World War, and it did not end very well for them. They, in fact, wanted German protection so much that they armed several SS regiments fighting Russia under German command and assisted the Nazis in the persecution of the local Jewry, very much like Ukraine. Realistically, it seems ridiculous to think that Putin would want to conquer Germany or any other Western European country. In principle, they can sell gas and oil and other resources to the West, Europeans, and prosper. Why should they want to rule Germany or, for that matter, Finland, if they have a hard time ruling their own country? One reason why the Baltics are so excited is that they have sizable Russian minorities that some of them treat very badly. The tensions with Russia might be more manageable without these immense preparations for war if the Russian minorities were given full citizenship and language rights and federal autonomy. That would mean they would no longer call on Moscow to help them against their governments. The worse they treat their Russians, the more Moscow might feel forced to do something for their compatriots. It is up to the Baltic states to decide how much pressure to put on their Russian minorities so that at some stage they will turn secessionists or irredentists. Instead, there are wild dreams about getting the West to defeat Russia for the benefit of the smaller nations on the Russian periphery. For instance, Kaja Kallas, the former Prime Minister of Estonia, who is now responsible for the foreign policy of the European Union, is said to have once suggested that Russia should be sliced up into 4 or 5 different states, and that only then will Europeans, that is, the Baltics, be safe. This, of course, has been tried before, and it turned out to be a disaster, including costing the lives of 15 million Russians alone. I claim that a safe life in Europe and in Germany is only possible if we find an arrangement to coexist in peace with Russia on the Eurasian continent. And this is linked to the bigger question of where Europe should go. Now, Streeck, who who gave that long quote, reflects a view shared by many informed analysts in Europe. I asked the same question in an interview with Heikki Patomäki, one of Finland's leading progressive intellectuals, and his answer was the following. It might be a simplification, but I'm in agreement with the basic thrust of what Streeck says. It is true that the Baltic countries, together with Poland, have been very vocal in their criticism of Russia. They've been able to change European Union policies as well as shape the general perception in Germany. They are totally negative about Russia and everything about Russia. This has reduced the space for any different thinking. It is concerning that Finland, which is Patomaki's country, has begun to follow the Baltic political line. For many decades, it was the other way around. Finland was showing the way to do things reasonably, and the Baltic countries looked to Finland as a model and an aspiration. Now, all of a sudden, it's the other way around, and this is problematic, unquote. So the NATO Ankara summit is over, with NATO emerging as aggressive as ever, as Joseph Gerson has asserted. I think it's fairly clear by now that the only solution to the Ukraine crisis is a diplomatic solution, because efforts to resolve things militarily by both sides over the last 4.5 years have failed, and both sides are bogged down in a stalemate. Certainly, NATO's position of fighting to the last Ukrainian is not viable. Europe's stance of keeping the US in the game is also worrisome, because the US is conditioning its support of Ukraine on the European countries spending 5% of their GDP on armaments, which will create tremendous economic dislocations and will only result in a militarization of Europe. So these are the reasons why people in the Global South, including myself, and most governments in the Global South, are very hesitant to step in to the Russia-Ukrainian crisis, and are in fact pushing for a diplomatic solution, because they know that a military solution, in fact, will not be possible. And in fact, if things continue as they are, they themselves might, in the end, be drawn into the conflict. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Walden, for your brilliant analysis of the war in Ukraine, and which is, of course, always a very important element in, let's say, the last decade in all NATO declarations. Like in this one, even if it's a short declaration, as Joseph also mentioned already, that the support for Ukraine, US and EU support, is continuing by this year, and I think next year again spending 80 billion or pledging 80 billion dollars for in military assistance and weapons and so forth. So essentially a policy to have the war continued, and instead of what you planning for, finding an urgent diplomatic solution for this war. Okay, we have a few minutes left for before we go to the second part for questions. So please, if you have a question, raise your hand or digital hand, and please be very brief in order so we can take a few questions when needed. But we hope to go to the second part the latest at 4 o'clock. So Ingvar Rönnbäck, yeah?
Thank you.
Please.
Sitting here in the northern part of Sweden on my vacation, but I thought this was so high interest for us. I'm the founder of another development foundation, and we're also affiliated to World Beyond War Network. I have two questions to both of you when you talk about diplomatic solutions and what kind of arguments that we need for such solutions. Do you think it's possible to use the current sort of environmental climate crisis that also hit Europe? Because you talk about the social problems that can due to militarization, but we also have a common global problem hitting hard on large parts of the world, but also in Europe today. So this is my first questions. Regarding the thoughts about diplomatic solutions, I do feel that it's necessary to also argue for the abolition of war itself, since it's become so enormously destructive and threatening because of many reasons. Do you feel that is arguments that can be sort of pushed for in this time of human history, or do you think it will be too visionary or too provocative? So I will ask this both to Walden and Joseph. I thought both were very, very, very interesting.
Thank you. Maybe I take a second question before then we can have them all answered by Levito. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Until 2022, most left-wing parties in European countries were opposing militarization or even advocating withdrawal from NATO. But since 2022, most of them have joined the right-wing parties in supporting both. How can this be understood?
Okay, thank you. It's short and clear. Okay, these were two questions. I think we have only time for those two questions. So please, Walden or Joseph, would you like to address them?
I'll jump in quickly. On the question of climate, I think it's not a central argument at this point, but I do want to point out that at least here in the United States, the vast level of military spending means we're not going to have money to defend our coastal civilization, right? I mean, the oceans are rising. Our major cities are on the coast, and I'm raising a grandson and younger generations, and the money is not going to be there to defend people's homes or their livelihoods. So it is an argument, but I don't think it can be made centrally at this point. We need to stop the killing. On the question of the European left, I think the Europeans need to respond to that. I'm not in a position to do it.
Thank you, Joseph. Walden, would you like to answer one of those questions or both?
Well, on the second point, I think that yes, definitely, I think there has been on the part of the social democratic parties in Europe, a move towards moving away from a neutral position into a pro-NATO position. In fact, two traditionally neutral countries, Sweden and Finland, dove into NATO, during the Russian invasion, and I think to some extent, I think the problem really has been this painting of Russia as the bogeyman. And, sober voices on the progressive left, like Wolfgang Streeck, for instance, would say, and I agree, that, why would Russia even think of invading Europe when it can't manage its own country? So there is this inability to look at the particularities of the Ukraine-Russia conflict and how that's rooted in so much linguistic, cultural, and political interests between these two sovereign entities. And that what needs to be done is to look at, and this goes to the first question, is to look at this key issues of autonomy, historical and linguistic concerns, and work out a settlement that pays attention to this. And I think that most European countries realize that, hey, this is not something that they're not familiar with. I mean, you're really talking about regionalistic, linguistic, cultural differences, even within countries, and how just talk about Spain, talk about a number of other countries, how these have been really very difficult issues, and so I think that those issues have to be frontally addressed instead of being forced into this sort of panic mode, where in fact you find a few countries, and I think I agree with Wolfgang here, like the Baltic states, practically now control European policy when it comes to Russia. And that's, I think, very problematic at this point. That would be my answer. It's a complex situation, and it cannot be responded to with a kind of a panic embrace of NATO.
Thank you, Walden. Thank you, Joseph. I'm sorry for the questions, Ivan and others that still have questions, but I think it's already late. We are 1 hour now, and we need to switch to the second part, else we will be late in general. So I give now the floor to Annachiara for the moderation of that.
Thank you so much, Ludo, and thank you to all the speakers. My name is Annachiara. I'm the Europe organizer at War Beyond War, and I will be facilitating this second part. In the second part of the webinar, we'll hear from our speakers how we as anti-war movement can come together in solidarity, expand our alliances, and connect with other movements and work to overcome the NATO war machine. So we already had some very interesting insights and really inspiring reports. And so we're gonna hear from different speakers. The first one is going to be Wright, and everyone is going to have 5 minutes. I'm sorry that if you go over time, we'll have to interrupt you. But so we make sure that we also have time for intervention from the audience at the end. So Wright is a member of Veterans for Peace. She was in the U.S. Army Reserves for 29 years and is retired as a colonel. She was also a U.S. diplomat, but resigned in opposition to the U.S. war on Iraq. And she now lives in Honolulu, Hawaii, where she's gonna share with us. So yeah, Anne, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's 4 a.m. here in Honolulu, and we have lots of things happening. So I'm going to share my screen to let us talk about issues here in the region. Let's see, where did I put it? We are going to talk about the Pacific and how NATO is invading the Pacific. I am here in Honolulu, Hawaii, which is the headquarters of the U.S. Pacific Command, which covers, as you can see on the screen, everything from the west coast of the United States all the way over to India. That's U.S. military concerns in that area. And yet it's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, North Atlantic, and here you see the countries of that, that has come into to the Pacific as a part of the Rim of the Pacific military naval exercises. There are 30 countries in RIMPAC this year, Rim of the Pacific. 10 of them are NATO members and 5 of them are NATO partners. There are over 30,000 military personnel, 40 ships, 5 submarines, 206 aircraft, and 15,000 land forces that have come into Hawaii on this military war practice. And of the 10 NATO countries that have come in, Denmark, Germany, Greece, Italy, Netherlands, Poland, Spain, UK, Canada, and the United States all have forces that are here. The RIMPAC, it's the largest naval exercise in the world. It's led by this aircraft carrier, the U.S. aircraft carrier, Teddy Roosevelt. And they even have T-shirts, of course, with it. And I was over at Pearl Harbor, saw this guy wearing the Teddy Roosevelt T-shirt for his aircraft carrier. The NATO partners, not members, plus one that are with RIMPAC are, of course, Japan, New Zealand, South Korea, and Australia. And then Colombia The only Latin America partner in NATO is also here. And then Israel, who has an office in Brussels in the headquarters of NATO, comes to these things, these military war maneuvers, and bringing all their experience in genocide, assassinations, AI, and surveillance to the military forces that are aligned here. So lots and lots of things happening. Of course, the focus is on China, and starting in 2022, that's when NATO started mentioning the importance of the Indo-Pacific area, and that China is a challenger to NATO's interests, security, and values. What do NATO countries continue to do besides being in this rim of the Pacific military exercise that happens every 2 years, and in the alternative years, they go to land exercises down in Australia. They also do freedom of navigation maneuvers near China, kind of in China's front yard. And you can see by this map the disputed areas between the Philippines, China, and Vietnam of these the island chains, and the construction on some of the small atolls of Chinese military places. Well, it's in China's front yard, so one could understand it. Now, the United States has over 800 military bases in other people's front yards or on their own territory. Dangerous confrontations that are happening between naval vessels out in the South China Sea, where vessels are running into each other, they're spraying each other with water, nonviolent, but still a mess. But here in the RIMPAC exercises, they practice sinking ships. And every time we have a military exercise here, they get one of these old ships that they say has been cleaned out of all of the environmental gunk, and they shoot it with missiles, they bomb it with aircraft, and they sink it with torpedo submarines. And I'll just mention one of the submarines that's a part of this RIMPAC and headquartered here home ported in Honolulu is the submarine USS Charlotte that sunk the Iranian frigate, which was 2,000 miles from Iran on March 4th. And here you can see the picture of the frigate as it was being torpedoed by this U.S. submarine from Hawaii. And this is it, the Daehon ship that's now at the bottom of the ocean with 87 people killed, 32 that they have not found the bodies of, and about 30 that survived. And this is a picture of the Charlotte, the killer submarine Charlotte that practices on, as all of RIMPAC do, practice killing people. Another part of this, a U.S. Navy missile killed 168 children and teachers in the school in Manab, Iran. And they are practicing this with these missiles that are killing people every day. We protest against it here in Hawaii. We have a big group that came out as the RIMPAC started on June 24th. And it's U.S. out of all the bases, wherever they are. And in the lower left corner, we all have a duty to disobey unlawful orders, which is part of our Veterans for Peace campaigns. Lots of protests again from Hawaii to the Philippines, Stop the War Machine. And here are some resources that we have on NATO in the Pacific. So remember that NATO is a worldwide organization now.
Thank you so much, Anne, for your presentation and for sharing with us. The next person is going to be Francis Daehon Lee from South Korea. Francis is a longtime peace activist and veteran of Korea's democratization movement. He's a board member of the International Peace Bureau. He has taught a leading university in Korea and Japan and has worked extensively to advance peace education across Asia. Thank you so much for being here, Francis. Just go ahead.
Thank you for having me in this session. Within 5 minutes, I'd like to introduce Republic of Korea, South Korea's role in NATO expansion. South Korea became a NATO partner in 2006 and increased its cooperation with NATO gradually, opened a mission in Brussels in 2022, and began working with IP4 partnership, Indo-Pacific Partnership, very actively. I'd like to highlight that this is a defense industry-based arms procurement partnership with NATO, and I believe countries like ROK and Japan are playing increasing role in expanding NATO. So this is a different frame than NATO invading Pacific area. This is South Korea, Japan, and these non-European countries inviting NATO in their own territories. The industrial partnership program includes joint research, joint production, and joint operation, and digital information sharing and strategic sharings. And South Korean companies are playing more and more important role. And the involved technologies are very, very important in cybersecurity, space warfare, digital warfare, AI warfare, and the hybrid warfare, etc. So all these important sectors for this hybrid warfare are now being in cooperation, close cooperation between ROK and NATO. And the irony is that about 2 years ago, South Korean people have overcome martial law and the attempt of the coup d'etat by the government and were helped to establish a democratic government. But now the new democratic government is even more energetic in pushing for a close cooperation of NATO and doing joint exercises in Asia Pacific. So this is a part of the rich industrial countries developing, extending their global security cooperation with the NATO countries, and in my view, significantly helping survival and expansion of NATO in this century. And joint military exercises are becoming more and more cyber-oriented, AI-oriented, comprehensive physical and cyber warfare combined. And very high-tech technologies and combined digital sharing are necessary part of these joint military exercises. And in the past 3 and 4 years, South Korea has become major supplier of the important weapons system. Poland outstands, Romania joined, and Norway and Netherlands will be the next market. So what does it mean? It means South Korea as being one of the most rapid weapon producing countries, high-tech weapons. Korea's technology, rapid weapon technology and production capabilities are being combined with NATO's long-standing military logistics expertise. This is a de facto integration of the military operation across very long distance and very large border areas. And in military concept, this is called interoperability of weapon system. So NATO and Korea and Japan in the Pacific part, these are becoming a part of the same military interoperable systems. In fact, one integrated military system. And if you look at the speech of the Korean president in the Ankara NATO summit, the speech sounds like almost a declaration of military alliance of South Korea to NATO by becoming key weapon system suppliers. So what impact should we anticipate from this cooperation across two regions? First, from the war in Iran, invasion to Iran, and the war in Ukraine, we learned that today's warfare is very much focused on the war of attrition. And countries like Japan and South Korea supplying high-tech weapons to NATO means that it's a revival of NATO's capability of attribution warfare, which is crucial, I believe, if Europe is to confront Russia. And the second impact is that maximization of interoperability and standardization of weapon system. This is beyond making clear treaties between two countries for military alliance. Before making a treaty, they are merging two military systems into one through interoperability and standardization of weapon system. And then number three, the spread of precision strike and dawn denial tactics, which was proved to be crucial in war in Ukraine. So this will further develop hybrid warfare, including air defenses and multiple launch rocket systems. And this hybrid warfare is very likely to combine with AI technologies and space-based intelligence technologies. So this is, in fact, a new form of integrated military force emerging without clear alliance building. So I think these are the underlying very important currents below the surface that's happening in cooperation between NATO and non-European countries in the Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francis, for your presentation and your analysis. And we'll have time also later on to discuss more. The next speaker is Kathy Kelly from the US. Kathy is the board president of War Beyond War. She has been involved in anti-war activism for over 25 years and has extensive experience carrying out civilian-based defense in conflict areas. And she also spent 18 months in US federal prisons for nonviolent protests at US military bases. Hello, Kathy. Thank you so much for being here. And
hello, Annachiara, and thank you to each of the presenters. This has been an extremely helpful event, and I want to thank you for thinking with me about the major threats that all of humanity faces, and in fact, all species on the planet. And of course, we're talking about nuclear annihilation, ecological collapse, the possibility of new pandemics, and the normalization of genocide, the ongoing genocide. NATO does not help secure or defend anyone from those threats. In fact, NATO will exacerbate each of those threats. And regarding the fourth threat, the genocide, the US provisioned Israeli genocide against Palestinians. Please join me in listening to a young woman who opened a concert that was called Songs Against Genocide. So in the United States, where I live, the major religion is not Islam or Christianity or Buddhism. Militarism is the major religion of the United States. It's such a cruel religion. It's a religion of extraction. And as we've heard earlier today, extraction of the hard-earned, needed resources of other countries all around the world to pour those resources into the already bloated coffers of Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Raytheon, now called RTX, and General Dynamics. And so it becomes very, very difficult, of course, for people to meet their valid human needs. So I'd like to share a screen for a moment and just look at a couple of slides with you. This is a portrayal of what I, as a kid growing up, heard the works of mercy. But what gets the upper hand? These terrible works of war, destroying the crops, seizing the food, destroy homes, scatter families, contaminate the water, imprison dissenters, inflict wounds and burns, and kill the living. And it reminds me of Ulla Gomp's cartoon that he produced in 1953. It was a Soviet cartoon magazine called Crocodile, and he entitled this cartoon, "At this American restaurant, only one patron is served." And of course, it's the hulking, monstrous patron of war. And this is Inge Palmer's version of a similar theme, that it's a Trojan horse to have all of these nuclear weapons go into Europe. And now we find that Sweden is compromising its neutrality. Finland has allowed nuclear weapons to be installed in Europe. Ireland is still using Shannon Airport for the transport of the weapons and the militarism goes on. But what would happen if the United States were to collaborate with its so-called enemies, with China, with Russia, with Iran? And what if we were to try to understand what it's like for China, for instance, to be surrounded by nuclear weapons and the United States military bases? China, which actually on this map, you can see just that one little base at the tip of the Horn of Africa in Djibouti. Not to say that China doesn't have militaristic designs, but as we face these terrible threats, including ecological collapse, we desperately need the scientists, the researchers, the bright minds to work together and collaborate. So last week it was very, very sorrowful, really, to see that Turkey had belittled the peacemakers, that in Turkey people were deported, they're still imprisoned. And so I'm very pleased myself to be part of World Beyond War because of many reasons, but in the coming weeks, we're preparing for a July 24th presentation of War Abolisher Awards. So I would like to call particular attention to two campaigns in Ecuador that managed to prevent installation of U.S. bases in Ecuador, to the very brave couple, Mazen Khumsia and his spouse, Jessie Chang Khumsia, and they coordinate an ecological historical peace center in Bethlehem. I'm happy to say that the artistic award will go to the two people who directed Earth's Greatest Enemy, Mike Preisner and Abby Martin. And then so importantly, the Organizational War Abolisher Award goes to Palestine Action, which has supporters all over the world because of their uncompromising, brave stand. And then finally, an award will go to the flotillas to Gaza, that miracle on the Mediterranean, with great, great thanks for all of the people who have participated in those efforts. And so as we go soon to hear from Ulla Klötzer, let's be grateful for the international solidarity that we have a big responsibility to preserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, indeed. And thank you for your presentation. For sharing with us also the video. The next speaker is going to be Pablo Ruiz from Chile. Pablo is a journalist and coordinates the Observatory for the Closure of the Schools of the Americas in Chile. He's the editor of the magazine El Derecho de Vivir en Paz, and he will be speaking in Spanish. You can turn on captions and they're going to translate into English. That should help you understand. And also his presentation is going to be in English. Yeah, the PowerPoints. Hola, Pablo.
Gracias. Gracias por la invitación. Mi nombre es Pablo Ruiz, soy coordinador de SWAT en Chile. Somos parte de este movimiento que nació en los Estados Unidos, fundado por Ruiz para denunciar el entrenamiento militar de tropas latinoamericanas en la Escuela de las Américas del Ejército de los Estados Unidos. Actualmente se le conoce como WINSET. Este lugar es responsable de que los militares cometieran graves violaciones a los derechos humanos en todo nuestro continente. Estamos hoy aquí en esta reunión para apoyar los esfuerzos de la Red Internacional No a la Guerra, No a la NATO. Trabajamos a favor de la paz y de la justicia social, por lo cual rechazamos todas formas de militarización y las guerras. En América Latina, Colombia es el único país latinoamericano que es considerado socio global de la OTAN. Brasil y Argentina cuentan con otra denominación atribuida a los Estados Unidos, quienes los cataloga como aliados principales extra-OTAN. En América Latina, Estados Unidos es el principal país de la OTAN que está presente en distintos países imponiéndonos bases militares. Reino Unido está presente en las Islas Malvinas, donde Argentina sigue reclamando su soberanía. En Chile, la ex ministra de Defensa Adriana del Piano y la embajadora alemana Susan Fritz-Geir suscribieron un acuerdo el 29 de julio de 2025, el que permitirá que Chile avance al nivel 2 del sistema de catalogación de armamentos de la OTAN. Rechazamos este acuerdo, rechazamos que en Alemania y que en otros países hayan armas nucleares. Nos preocupa que Alemania, de acuerdo a un informe de la Agencia Internacional de Energía Atómica, hoy tenga las capacidades para fabricar sus propias armas nucleares. Rechazamos el gasto militar de los países de la OTAN y de todos los países. La militarización del mundo nos puede llevar a una guerra mundial y debemos todos seguir denunciando este peligro. Finalmente, en Paraguay, en los primeros días de julio de este año, varias organizaciones de América Latina nos reunimos para trabajar contra el gasto militar y contra la militarización. Queremos dinero para la vida, queremos vivir en paz. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Pablo. Thank you so much for your presentation as well and for sharing your perspective. The next speaker is going to be Sean Connor. He's the current executive director of the International Peace Bureau. He brings a wide range of experiences with peace work and activism. Prior to joining the IPB team in Berlin, he worked for the Center for Cross-Cultural Study in the USA and also in a community development project in Nicaragua. Hello, Sean, and welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Annachiara, and thanks to all the speakers beforehand. You may have caught Vezal when she was speaking. She mentioned I was unfortunately one of those international solidarity activists that was detained when trying to attend the summit in Turkey in Istanbul last weekend. So I've been out for about a week now, and I do have to say I was one of the lucky ones, and that's, you know, we were only detained for less than 24 hours before we were deported. And from our understanding here today, there are many that are still imprisoned or facing legal difficulties within Turkey for their involvement. So what I will speak about briefly today goes a little bit of what I would have said in Istanbul if I had been there, but also a little bit of a reaction to my own experience. I want to focus on combating the narrative and propaganda of NATO as an important step of what we need to do. NATO has developed over decades a really efficient and strong self-promotion technique that has given NATO, unfortunately, a well-received connotation among many in the Western world. It's seen as a defensive alliance that is never aggressive. It is there to defend should anything happen. Of course, the only time that defense was used was after 9/11, where NATO allies joined the US in its illegal invasions and wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. There's also the factor of shared values that they promote very, very strongly. Those values, of course, being democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, all of which are directly contradicted by the detainment of Turkish activists and international solidarity activists, as we saw just prior to the NATO summit last weekend. Or the NATO summit last week, the counter summit the weekend. And so despite these narratives that NATO likes to use, the reality shows us, of course, a very different picture. Speaking a bit from my personal experience, I was surprised the number of my friends who hold still, unfortunately, quite positive understandings of NATO how surprised they were to hear that I was detained upon entering Turkey. Then this, I think, automatically starts to shift people's mindsets when they realize, these propaganda lines that they hear over and over aren't true. There are no shared values among NATO members. There is not democracy across all NATO members, and there weren't from the start of NATO. There were non-democratic members in the original configuration, and that remains true today, particularly in Turkey. Human rights, of course, we've seen in the wars that NATO themselves and their own individual members have either been directly involved in or supported in many ways. Human rights are violated every time. There is no war that takes place where human rights are not violated. And of course, the rule of law means next to nothing to NATO, as they constantly betray that as well. When it comes to the defensive alliance rhetoric, the other big line that NATO uses to talk about itself, this basically consists of an active deterrence through an arms race. And they claim that deterrence will prevent conflicts and protect the alliance members from other nations. What we see in reality is quite different. We know how it works when NATO rearms itself, when it conducts endless military exercises around the world. The rest of the world reacts to that. And what do? They increase their own arms manufacturing. They have their own more aggressive military policies. And we find ourselves in an escalating arms race and a more dangerous international situation that does not make Europe, the US, or anywhere around the world more peaceful or resolve the ongoing conflicts that we have. In fact, it only increases the likelihood for those conflicts to escalate, to expand, and for war to come to NATO. With all of this in mind, what I had hoped to speak about in Istanbul in a bit more detail was the concept of common security. And I know that Joseph has already said a few words about common security. I'm aware I don't have too much time here, so I'll make sure to post the links in the chat. But generally, common security is a very effective tool also for combating this defensive alliance deterrence rhetoric that NATO likes to use. As NATO members themselves, or current NATO members, were a part of the 1980s projects for building common security, which came out with the original report in 1982. And now many of those same members are going very much against what they had concluded were the only actions that could resolve the, at the time, NATO Warsaw Pact heightening tensions and nuclear risks, with the Euro missile crisis being one of the major moments. By coming to the table and realizing that we cannot make security against one another, we cannot have deterrence against one another, but have to find ways to make security together. So without going into too much detail there, just to say that I think it's really important that we are actively challenging the narrative and propaganda that NATO is using, because they have way more people and resources to bring this narrative forward. But as soon as it goes under any analysis, under the microscope, we see all the contradictions and flaws with the narrative that NATO itself is using. And we have the answers, we have the tools to combat that and to make sure we're reaching people that maybe believe what NATO says about itself, and presenting them with alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. Indeed, solidarity to the activists that are still detained right now, and to all those that have been detained. And I'm glad that you had a chance to speak today. So our next and last speaker is Ulla Klötzer from Finland. She's a retired teacher. She's a long-standing peace, environmental, and democracy activist, and she's part of the Global Women for Peace United Against NATO, GWAN. And she's actively building networks around these issues in the North countries, Europe, and elsewhere. Thank you so much, Ulla. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear fellow campaigners, first of all, my respectful thanks to our fellow campaigners in Turkey that despite hostile behavior of the authorities, breaking all rules of democratic and human rights behavior and showing the real nature of NATO, did their utmost to show resistance to this monstrous war machinery. They didn't give up. A short NATO summit was held this time in order not to upset the easily upsettable US president. But still he announced the deal with Iran was over. He will cut off trade with Spain, and he still has got plans for Greenland. Rutte already before the summit warned that NATO has ways to deal with the members that cannot present clear, concrete, and credible plans to reach the 3, later 5% goal of GDP for war investments. Joseph already mentioned some disagreement issues within NATO, which should be part of our work in the near future. We should use them. So I will only mention the controversy that is brewing behind the scenes due to a competition between two different models that have been launched by UK and Canada for accelerating defense investments. UK has presented the multilateral defense mechanism model, and Canada has launched the defense, security, and resilience model. They are supported by different countries. Finland supports the UK. There are significant differences between the two projects in how they aim to increase defense investments and what role public money will play. That's important for us. This will certainly be discussed separately in our movements in the near future. So our challenges remains to continue our struggle for getting NATO dissolved. We must get stronger. We must never give up. A momentum might appear sooner than we expect when transatlantic frictions also of interests between different European member states, and dissatisfaction with the US playing solo on the global stage increase. When the total mess of Israel's Middle East actions opens up, including the latest threats of Israel that Turkey is the new Iran, it will certainly add to more NATO disharmony. Maybe the iron grip on NATO members commanded by the US will start eroding, giving peace and social movements a tiny chance to get heard. Global Women for Peace United Against NATO, GWAN, has no financial means whatsoever, but we will, within our limits, continue our work trying to activate more women around the world, strengthen our networks, organize webinars, take part in demonstrations, appeals, and so on. At the moment, we are collecting images of protests against militarization and NATO from all over the world to be compiled into a photo collage in an easy and cheap manner that would eventually be sent out in September to as many NATO member states and partnership countries, governments, parliamentarians as possible, as well as the NATO headquarters, EU commissioners, EU parliamentarians, and so on. We have done so before with 2 photo collages of women saying no to NATO all around the world. This time it will be demonstrations of groups. Since NATO's war machinery is obedient to the US hegemonic ambitions, demonstrations for peace and against the military-industrial complex, as well as for stopping the breakdown of laboriously built welfare systems, are also protests against protests against the US behavior on the global scene should all be seen as protests also against NATO. Also, climate change protests can be seen as such due to the enormous military CO2 emissions. The 3.5% NATO goal of GDP would hit roughly the combined annual emissions of Brazil and Japan. Not to speak of the 5% goal, so they are not small emissions. Social unrest is growing. Many EU country leaders are seen as untrustworthy and weak. And the stage might open up for political leaders that realize they must become responsive to what the people want from them. We have an example, a small one, but still in Spain. Maybe these are just my misinterpretations and dreams, but we must never lose hope in dreams and miracles. We must continue promoting dialogue and cooperation as the only ways to peace and justice. Peace among peoples and with nature. Let's stay strong together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ulla, for your inspiring words and for your calls to action as well. And thank you to all the speakers. It's really always, it's nice and good to see that there's so much activism going on everywhere in the world. I think for all of us, and it's important to remember, even when we see what's happening and increased militarization everywhere, and especially connected to NATO. But yeah, it's good to remember that there is hope, as Ulla was saying, and especially when we stand together in solidarity. Now we can have some questions maybe from the participants. If you have any question for the speakers, I saw that some of you were already typing in the chat and responding to each other, but feel free to raise your hands. And we don't have so much time, so also please keep the question quick and to the point. I see Margaret as their hand up, so if you can unmute yourself, feel free to ask.
Yes, hang on. Yes, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Hello, I'm Canada. I'm Dutch living in Canada. I have more of a point of attention, and I wonder if people are aware. The use of the electromagnetic spectrum nowadays is very central in today's warfare. They call it electromagnetic warfare. And people are fully aware of the hazards of ionizing radiation, such as nuclear weapons. What most people miss still is the hazardous effect of the pervasive non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation. Sounds very technical, but that's really radio frequency radiation is whatever you use as your wireless laptop, your wireless earbuds, but also satellites and the constant, and it's very pervasive, and nature and society has never been so inundated with this type of radiation, which affects both humans, plants, animals. And especially if you want to be worried about your food, pollinators, bees, birds, other insects. And so I would appeal to the peace movement to also start looking into this part of warfare. I know it's a little bit outside the scope today, but this technology is heavily used both in warfare and in peacetime. It has enormous advantages, but also enormous downsides. And I can provide some links in the chat, because this information is heavily suppressed by governments and the armed forces because it's so necessary for the military. The armed forces and the military-industrial complex has known this since the 1940s and 50s, because radar sickness was something that was in the armed forces, and it's going to be more and more. Also, pilots in new warfare planes are getting more and more cancers related to the jamming and the radio frequency radiation levels within the planes. So I would just like to add this, and I'm not sure if people have heard about that, but thank you for your attention. I'd really like to bring this in. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. We're going to get more questions maybe, and then we see if any of the speakers would like to respond. Tamara?
Hi, everyone. Nice to be with you all. I also am in Canada, in Waterloo, Ontario, and I just wanted to let you know that we have been mobilizing for really, really hard for the past 2 decades against NATO, and we're starting to turn the tide in Canada. So I'm very pleased that we've got more and more Canadians who are opposed to NATO. And I want to let you know that during the NATO summit, the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network issued a statement for Canada out of NATO. We've been having rallies across the country over the past 2 weeks. We also have a petition calling for Canada to cancel plans to establish a NATO war bank. We should be calling the Defense, Security and Resilience Bank a NATO war bank. That's what it is. What we don't need this war bank. We need a multilateral development bank for climate action and for poverty elimination. You know, that's what we're calling for. I also want to just bring to your attention that in Canada, in our parliament, we don't have any political opposition to NATO. And this is in all of our NATO countries, because there's this process of socialization for the parliamentarians to support NATO. And this happens through the NATO Parliamentary Assembly program. And I want to bring to your attention to follow not just the NATO summit, but also the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and to protest these. The next one is going to be taking place in Berlin, November 20th to 23rd. One happened in Montreal, and we had a rally against it, and we also had a counter assembly. So I just bring this to your attention. And then finally, I want to share a really important resource for all of you, because I still think that our analysis about the war in Ukraine is limited. And I bring to your attention this very important book by Benoit Paré, What I Saw in Ukraine. 7 years he was with the OSCE on the contact line, and it is NATO Ukraine aggression against the Russian-speaking Donbass. It is the US and NATO that started this war in Ukraine. Yes. And I also want to correct one thing quickly that Walden Bello said. There was an independent fact-finding mission on the conflict between Georgia and Russia in 2008, and the fact-finding mission said definitively it was the US NATO-backed Georgia that started the war against the Russian-speaking minority in South Ossetia. So the blame is on Georgia, not Russia, for that. And it's the same thing that goes for Ukraine. So we need to get our analysis correct about the war in Ukraine, because it is a US NATO proxy war using Ukraine against Russia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tamara. I think next we can go to Bernard or Ingvar, since you already had some time earlier. But Bernard, if you can unmute yourself. And if you have any questions for the speakers also.
Yes, I do. I was wondering what your thoughts are regarding the idea that NATO keeps talking about putting pressure on Russia by building and providing other weapons. They put pressure. That's how they always say it for four years. Do you feel that NATO is also putting pressure on us and all of our associations, everyone who's trying to resist? Do you feel the same kind of aggression, or is it my imagination? Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. I don't know if any of the speakers would like to react already to any of this intervention, or otherwise we can also take in more questions maybe. Okay. Ivan, would you like to ask a question?
Was it me or was it Ivan?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I was going to say Ivan. Yes, we can hear Ivan.
Okay, perfect. Right, okay, sorry to be blunt, but just this is what's going through my head these days. NATO has expanded right to Russia's border over the past 35 years. There's been an active proxy war with Russia for the past 4 years. I feel like I'm waiting for like the nukes to just, it could happen at any time. Like Ukraine was hammering Moscow the other day. Is the left sincere about trying to stop a nuclear war? Or maybe we don't really deserve to not die in a nuclear war. Everything that the West has done through colonialism and now climate change, I don't know. Are we sincere about actually trying to stop one? That's my question.
Thank you, Ivan. Maybe we can take one more question and then see if the speaker would like to respond. Yes, Tom, would you like to unmute
Yes, we
yourself?
are very sincere, and I'm speaking to you from the UK. You've probably heard of our Prime Minister Starmer, a big advocate of NATO, but what's happening to Starmer? He's just had to resign, so things aren't going very well for pro-NATO people. I'd just like to shout out for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is being reviewed in November, but only for 5 days. Please, if you can, join us in CND in the UK and campaign on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. We've already passed a resolution in our National Council to campaign on this, and we'd invite all of you to think about the prohibition of nuclear weapons in the rest of the world. It's really great to see how many people around the world are on this webinar. And certainly, I've had several meetings this week. So there's a lot of activism in the UK and in Europe as well. So it's a real pleasure to campaign with you. But please think about the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Thank you very much, Annachiara. It's lovely to meet you.
Thank you so much, Tom. Same here. And thank you for sharing that. Ulla, would you like to respond?
Yes, I will take them one by one. First, Margaret, about the electromagnetic warfare. It's really interesting, and we should really pay attention to it. But in Global Women for Peace United Against NATO, we must always get the NATO perspective. But all the others can also tackle this problem. We are going to have, GWAN is going to have a webinar on artificial insanity, the RE, A or whatever it is in English, in the autumn. And I think this could be a part of it if we can get the electromagnetic warfare angle into NATO. So Margaret, I would love to have your email. I would get in contact with you. Tamara, about Russia and Ukraine, you know, I share your perspective completely. It started by Maidan coup in 2014 when the US wanted badly to get Sweden and Finland into NATO because they want to have the Arctic partners, and they wanted to have Finland's long border protected against Russia for them. So it started already then. To Bernard, pressure on us, yes, of course. The mainstream media totally in the hands of US and NATO has silenced all the debate amongst some more clever people in the society. In Finland, you cannot talk about NATO because everybody is Russophobic. We need it. We must have it. And that is a picture created by our mainstream media and our politicians. And there are no news about protests going on or what happened in Ankara with the with the people coming in to go to the alternative summit. Nothing is reported. And that is a way to silence us, Ivan. And also in Finland, they have taken all the public money from any kind of peace organizations, which had been integrated in the public budget since the beginning of the 19th century. And now there is nothing. And this is also a way to strangle us, of course. So yes, we are being influenced. And to Tom about Starmer and Lakenheath, yes, Starmer, go away. I think this is maybe something we can see. In Finland and Sweden, we have parliament elections in Sweden in the autumn and in Finland in spring. I don't believe in social democrats anymore also. I have lost my faith in politicians, but I also see that politicians fear that they are not accepted anymore. So if we can get in and push for a change in these two countries, we could also come to Tom's suggestion about forbidding nuclear arms, because in the social democratic movement in Sweden, Olof Palme had a very, very good position. He was respected worldwide for his anti-nuclear weapons work. In Finland, we had Urho Kekkonen, a president from the Center Party, surprisingly, and he was really pushing hard for nuclear weapon-free zones. We should, with eventual new governments in our countries, take up these positions again and start pushing internationally, not only Swedish and Finnish peace organizations, but getting an international pressure for again reviving these two, unfortunately or fortunately, males' good work that they had leading up to, at that moment, not very much, but OSCE was created and so on. So let's join hands, and we have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulla, for your response to many of the questions. Just checking if any of the other speakers would like to intervene, respond, or share something. Feel free to unmute yourself. Thank you so much, Katie. I see that you need to leave. Thank you so much. Yes, I would say I would have loved to take more questions, but we're really like almost out of time. Maybe you can also put your question in the chat, Isabel and Ingvar, if you want to share something, and then there is still time for some response maybe. But yeah, I also like to thank all the speakers again. Thank Michelle for her tech support. She's been working very hard behind the scenes, if you don't see her. And also, I would like to have Ludo. Yeah, he was going to share some final words regarding what we just discussed and the NATO network. I guess Ludo's still there. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Annachiara. Well, I think time is running, and I think there are so many were so many interesting interventions by those we invited to speak, and also by the audience. So I think it's very clear that we really need, and it's more and more urgent, a common front, let's say, within civil society, individuals and organizations to strengthen that fight against NATO's war-driven order, let's say, and the militarization of our society or societies and the diversion of public funds towards armaments. This must be stopped, and I think this common front, as I say, is something we need to build together, not only with peace organizations, but we need to convince, as we try to do and also succeeded partly, the 14th of June in Brussels, the welfare not warfare demonstration with 10,000 participants, with the trade unions and other movements, environmental movements, because we are all involved. And I always say it's a trade union issue to oppose militarization, since it's diverting important resources from other domains that are very essential: social protection, environmental justice. And so what I think people need is another security architecture, common and human security, which requires, and this is our message towards politicians, those who are responsible making policies, the prioritization of dialogue and diplomacy, disarmament, and respect for mutual security interests, which have been breached in Europe towards Russia, for example. I think that, and we have seen what came out. And so I think also what is very important, that we express our support and solidarity with all peoples facing colonial domination, occupation, military repression, and violence, and especially our solidarity again towards those people that have been arrested in Turkey in opposing the NATO summit in Ankara. And so I think finally we call on, let's say, as a movement, or we should call on as a movement, all nations and peoples to work together to tackle the real dangers, the real planetary threats, by implementing far-reaching climate measures. Really, we should do that and should be done in the coming years to address this climate danger, and also banning nuclear weapons. It's also a sword of Damocles above our heads, and ensuring, and this is very important, that people worldwide have access to basic service. I would say no to war, no to NATO, very simply. That's our aim, and we continue to oppose that. And I invite you all to look to those organizations, international organizations, that are organizing webinars. We need to inform ourselves and also to distribute the message, and go also to the website No to War, No to NATO, who is the organizer of this webinar. Thank you very much for coming and for joining us here, and hopefully we see us back soon in another peace event. Thank you very much.